recorded. So I need to click the button so that we'll upload it to the public image tab of the website. Thank you, David, for doing that into the future. And I am Melissa McCormick. I'm the Public Image District Chair, and we are kicking our spring training season off with Gary Rowe, who is going to help us with writing press releases. So Gary, why don't you, and I'm going to monitor the chat. So if anybody has any questions, just put your questions in the chat. And then if we've got some time at the end, then we'll go through those. All right.
Okay, ready to go?
Ready to go.
Hi, everybody. I know some of you from your registration names. I'm Gary Rowe in the Rock Island Rotary Club. And just a quick introduction. I have a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Illinois and a master's degree in journalism from the University of Iowa. I was going to be the sports editor of the Chicago Tribune or the South American bureau chief for the New York Times, or whoever was lucky enough to have me. I went to the dark side and worked in corporate public relations and then spent the bulk of my career in the nonprofit sector. But it's okay. I still do this and I still use this. So we're going to talk a little bit about writing press releases and then what you do with them after you've written them. And by all means, I welcome your questions and comments either during the presentation or in the chat, and Melissa's going to monitor that for us. So you want to write a news release. So get started. You want to identify the author, who to contact for information, and I put that information in the upper right corner of the news release like that. So for additional information, the author's number. And I will tell you, and Melissa is just an awesome public image chair and so patient with me in my technology. My first brush with technology in my first job in 1970, I got a Smith Corona electric portable typewriter with cassettes that you put in and out to type and then correction. And I thought, I can't imagine more technology than this. So don't come to me for your tech stock advice. But in any case, we learn and we grow. So that's your identifying information. You want a headline and you want the editor or the recipient to know what your story is about. One line, centered, all caps in bold. They'll give you 10 to 15 seconds to look at who the release is from and what the subject is. So here's what we did with this one. Rock Island Rotary Awards Service Above Self Scholarship, and our local media have been pretty good about covering schools things, that kind of thing. Put the most important information, the lead first. So you can see that for yourself. 18-year-old Rock Island high school graduate's first reception of the Service Above Self $1,000 scholarship. She's a 2021 graduate of Rock Island High School. She'll attend Augustana College to study environmental biology. And then you add some details. That is an actual quote from her. What makes up the scholarship award, how it was chosen, grade point average, extracurricular, and an essay, how it's administered. It's named in honor of Fred Holton. And I might have gotten Fred's, I think he's a 65-year member of Rotary. It's incredible, with perfect attendance the whole time. Holy cow, Fred. But we named that in his honor. Quote a person in authority, give yourself a little credit. So this was a statement from the club president at the time. This is the first year we'd awarded that scholarship. Talked about our youth activities and one more expression of our support for youth in our community. Little more detail. We did fund this and endow it to the level of $30,000 so it can be granted in perpetuity. And in fact, Rock Island Rotary is doing a fundraiser this year to add to the scholarship so that we might be able to increase that award amount to $1,200, $1,250. Ultimately, we'd like to get it up to $1,500 to $2,000. Tell them what the heck Rotary is. So 92 members is generous because I counted, we have 6 corporate memberships that each have 3 members. So that puffs that up a little bit. And then some, just some information about Rotary that I took right from their website. And then you put the whole thing together. Here's what the finished product looks like. I try to keep them to a page. Sometimes I will add a fact sheet to it. I notice I got my type fonts a little off there. Oops, let's go back. So there's that. Any questions on that part of it?
Gary, when you have a media list that has more than just newspapers in it, let's say radio or TV or
Yep.
websites, or whatever the case may be, would you change your formula in any way?
I really wouldn't, but unless you know the medium, sometimes Tom, for the broadcast ones, they'll just want to do an interview with you. Particularly radio, there used to be, and we'll talk about that a little bit, more radio coverage here in the Quad Cities. There were 2 big radio, what's the right word, conglomerates that had 6, 7 stations each. iHeartRadio was one of them. And they had regular news coverage and they don't anymore. Sometimes they would do the interview and then I would send the release to them for supplemental information. And on television, I'd like to give it to them ahead of time so that they have that and the reporter interviewer can ask those knowing questions. So I understand this scholarship is endowed, or, you know, I know that Rotary does this. Tell me other things that you do. Another thing you can do in maybe in lieu of this format is a fact sheet and just fill in the who, what, when, where, why. So why you're talking to them, what difference this makes, what the details are, and so on. This is a format that I have liked and used, but you can vary that. You certainly can.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah,
Sure.
thank you.
So we'll talk about placing these a little bit. And this certainly has changed in our vicinity here. We used to have 3 daily competitive newspapers, one in Moline, one in Rock Island, and one based out of Davenport. They are all under one ownership now, and their coverage has shrunk and their staffs have shrunk. And we're seeing that in, that's a trend that I'm sorry to see. So you have to know your local community. Some places, this is in club news, they'll have something called community happenings, community news. You will know that better than I. You might have a chance with local radio, particularly in some of the rural areas. My wife is from a small town in Northeast Iowa. Her mom used to listen to the local radio station to hear the obituaries because the paper was only published weekly. But it serves a real need in those communities, and public radio can be your friend. Certainly always try, and you know, websites and webinar or electronic communications have certainly changed this, but you could put together the basic facts and then include them in your Facebook posting or your website posting or your email to the news media outlet. So the locals don't take paper copies anymore. They want just electronic submissions. So that's what I have done. Look at television in your area too. Lots of them have kind of a poor man's version of Good Morning America or the Today Show or CBS Morning News. They are hungry for content, and they might have a noon show. They might have a late afternoon, early evening show. So see if you can get some things in there. And from time to time, you will have good luck. Public service announcements are because the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, changed its requirements, you're not going to have as much in the way of public service announcements as you once did, but those are still possible. Look at the Chamber of Commerce publication in your vicinity. There might be a Convention and Visitors Bureau. Sometimes a community foundation, if it's something that's related to them, will use your news, like this one would have been in the local community foundation. Sometimes corporate newsletters, if they're still doing such a thing, you talk to their public information person, their public relations person, and see if he or she will use that. In the Quad Cities too, we have the Convention and Visitors Bureau. They're real good for fundraising event kind of things. So for example, Rock Island has on Friday night rock and roll bingo. We were able to publicize that through them. We had our first one last year. I will admit to you, I went, and because they didn't have music by the Beach Boys or the Beatles or Carole King, I felt like I had gone to the wrong family reunion. But my kids went and they would say, this is this, fill out this square. So it was a fun evening. It was okay. And more to the point, we're able to publicize it. Look at other service clubs. We have a good relationship with the Rock Island Kiwanis Club. They meet on Monday noons at the Quad City Botanical Center, and Rock Island Rotary meets Tuesday noons. So we'll swap news back and forth between the clubs, and we do it with other Rotary clubs in our vicinity. Sometimes a church is a possibility, or your school system, if you're doing something that is involving their students that will impact their students in a positive way. So just be as creative as you know how to be. It certainly is something that has changed through my work life. Other ideas that people have, things good and bad that have worked or not worked for you.
Well, Gary, I want to only add that America's most important news outlet is, of course, the district newsletter and website. And so Melissa should be on your mailing list. I would think about that.
You're absolutely right. And I was negligent in not saying that. Yeah. And kudos to Melissa, who's always prodding us to remember them. So, and one thing we talked about the other day, Public Image Committee met Monday, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong. We talked about starting a session or a section on welcoming new members to clubs. So, the Rock Island Club welcomed Joe Smith and Mary Jones. Start doing that. It illustrates growth and maybe sparks other clubs to think about membership, and also the good service projects you do, successful fundraisers, partnerships among clubs, and so on.
Gary, Dave Dozier has a question here. He's got, do you typically hear back from the media outlet before they publish it, or do you just submit and hope for the best?
I submit and follow up with a phone call, either a phone call or an email. And I guess you pitch to them a little bit. Frankly, it sounds a little unsavory, but or a little cliched, but that does help. And if you develop relationships over time, there was a radio news host who covered like 4 stations locally, and I had developed a good relationship with him. I would tape some things and or record some things with him, and they play at awful times, like 7 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Couldn't tell you how many people said they'd heard it. And it was worth it to cultivate that relationship. The news director at the local local public radio station in Rock Island was a wonderful consumer of news things. And I got to know the city editors at the newspapers. So it's a relationship you develop over time, but it is worth it is worth, Dave, a follow-up with them.
Good question.
Back in the old days, I used to hand deliver paper copies to them. I know it sounds like I did that in a horse and buggy. It sounds so quaint now, but
So I have a question, my own
Sure.
question, and that is, I get some of the feedback I get about sending press releases is, what if I'm not a good writer? Do I have to really be it's intimidating to somebody who hasn't written and it's going to go into the paper. So what if I'm not a good writer?
follow the, I'm a regular viewer of PBS Evening News. And when they were in their homes, Amna Devaz, who's now one of the co-anchors, had a big poster in her office study, wherever she was broadcasting from at home, that said who, what, when, where, why, and how. Just follow that formula. And then find somebody, there's got to be somebody in their acquaintanceship circle, friendship circle, collegial circle, who is a good writer and can suggest some ways to either tighten it up or sparkle up your copy a little bit. It's not a time to get real creative generally for the news that we're doing as Rotary clubs, but there could be a feature element that could catch somebody's attention. So don't be shy about asking. And just as a public image thing, if anybody wanted it, if you want to shoot me an email with something in it, I would do that. Take a look at it. And some of the editing software, Grammarly blog, and just in the newer versions of Word will at least fix your spelling and grammar. Sometimes you got to take care of the syntax yourself, but
yeah. The other thing I think is important to remember is you don't have to tell them everything you know. Really, if it's more than a page, you're probably wasting paper.
I agree.
Yeah, Norman has a note here in the chat. In past experiences working with university events, he would submit a list of questions that the interviewer could ask. And it allowed me to sort of direct the focus. I think it did more than sort of. I think that's a fantastic strategy. Often the interviewer was happy because he or she was pressed for time in preparing, and this solved that problem for them. So I think that's a great strategy.
That is a wonderful strategy. Mm-hmm. And they appreciate it. And you could do it with like boldface questions and then your answers done. And it's not impinging on these are people who are overworked and stressed and probably juggling 6 stories in the air at the same time. So it gives you a track to run on. I think another thing to remember is 98% of the time, it's not 60 minutes. They're not doing an investigative dig into you. They want to help you tell your story. They don't stay in business by going on all the organizations in the community. So it's hard to spell that, I know, but they won't you. Remember that they're your allies. And always tell them the truth.
Yes.
We see what happens when they don't. So anything else that would be helpful?
I thought that, and I'm not sure if it's still true or not, but in the previous years when I was working with universities, the smaller papers around the area typically had sort of a standard space that they could use. And if you wrote the press release to fit that space, a lot of times they just published it verbatim.
Yes, I've had that experience too.
Yeah.
Oh, one other strategy that's been useful for me with my job with the Rock Island Community Foundation, the local newspaper used to print the names of our grant recipients and what they got money for and the amount that they received. They don't do that now. So I write a letter to the editor. And thanks to the generosity of our local donors, we were able to make grants to 42 organizations totaling $103,000, $103,500. And you put a couple samples and maybe give them a couple recipients whom you have talked to and say, this money will enable us to do this for the community. I've had good success with that.
I love that strategy. That's fantastic. We need to do
Yeah,
that for
that
all
worked.
of our literary grants.
Yeah, it actually works pretty well. And that's the kind of feel good thing that they like.
Mhm.
Occasionally too, you can talk to them and they'll say, why don't you expand this into an opinion page
Yes.
piece? They'll give you a word count and so on. And that's possible. Another thing is if they have a columnist who's doing about the community kinds of stuff, talk to her or him and see what they might use.
So how do
never
we
hurts.
find those people, right? So if we're starting from scratch, like our club hasn't, hypothetically, our club hasn't, really worked that much with press releases or opinion pieces, or even have any relationship with our local media, how do you start? How do you find them?
We'll start with the list of who are the media that cover your area. And maybe a couple people could do it. Watch, listen, and read what they do, what appeals to them, and try to tailor your messages to them as much as you can. And know that nobody bats 1,000, so there are going to be some that they're just not going to use. It's great news to you. And they're one of my favorite stories when I worked for a children and families organization. We were having a big press conference. We did a thing in April called Salute to Teens Week. And we'd send out as many as 10,000 postcards to teens that parents and teachers and grandparents and so on would write, dear Melissa, I'm so proud of you. You're working so hard in school and, thanks for being a great kid kind of thing. So we're having this press conference. It's going well. All their phones started ringing. They ran out of the room. The first gambling boat was coming up the Mississippi and it ran aground on a shoal. And they thought the boat was going to sink. So you can't compete with a sinking boat.
No.
That was just a sexy visual story that they loved. They were good to us and we had coverage and we had press packets for them and all that. But there are things that are just going to be out of your, no matter
Yes.
what you do, don't beat yourself up if something like that happens.
I think that's a absolutely great tip and a great place for us to stop. Unless, Gary, you had anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, thank you very
You're
much
good.
for the opportunity. And I've gotten to know some of you through district things and public image things. I'm a chatty guy. So you want to talk about any of this, give me a buzz or send me an email and we'll be happy to discuss it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to have this recording uploaded onto the public image tab of our district website. And then our next training session, I need to find a better name for our spring training here. I feel like this is kind of a fireside chat type of format, which I really like. Anyway, our next one will be on April 26th at 12:30. We're doing these lunch and learns, and we established them on Wednesdays because a lot of clubs do have Wednesday meetings, and we thought this could be part of the program. We need to promote that so everybody kind of knows what our strategy was behind the day and the time. It's April 26th, and we're going to focus on the Rotary Showcase. So Rotary International wants us to not only upload our events to our district calendars, but also to the Rotary Showcase. So we'll learn more about that, and we'll talk about whatever else public image is on our mind at that time. So I thank everybody for joining us, and I wish you a fantastic day.
See y'all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye. Thank you.
Hey, Laura.